The moment people started comparing Infanta Sofia to Princess Leonor again this week, I knew they were missing the real story. Because honestly, the biggest thing happening inside Spain's royal family right now is not rivalry. It's separation, not emotional separation, strategic separation, and once you notice it, you can't unsee it anymore. Leonor is being shaped into an institution. Sofia is being shaped into something completely different. And I don't think the palace accidentally allowed that difference to become visible. I think they wanted us to notice. Especially after those recent appearances where Leonor looked almost fully locked into future queen mode while Sofia still carried this freer, more relaxed energy around her. That contrast felt intentional, and honestly, it made me start asking a bigger question. What happens when two sisters grow up inside the same palace, but destiny only fully chooses one of them? Because that's the hidden emotional story nobody talks about enough. If you're new to Leonor's story, subscribe, I post every day. Because I genuinely think the relationship between Leonor and Sofia may become one of the most important royal dynamics in Europe over the next decade, not because of drama but because of how differently their futures are now unfolding. And honestly, I think Spain's monarchy is handling this smarter than many royal families did in the past. See, historically, royal spares often struggled badly. Prince Harry became the global example everybody references now, but honestly, this issue existed long before him. The second-born royal often grows up trapped between privilege and invisibility. Close enough to power to feel its pressure, but far enough away to feel replaceable. That psychological tension can become dangerous over time. And I think Spain's palace understands that deeply. That's why Sofia's path already feels intentionally different from Leonor's. Less institutional, less rigid, less symbolic, almost more human-sized. And honestly, that might be the healthiest thing they could possibly do for her. Because here's my hot take. I don't think modern monarchies can survive anymore if they emotionally sacrifice every family member for the institution. Audiences are too emotionally intelligent now. People notice unhappiness quickly, they notice imbalance, they notice isolation, and after years of watching royal tensions explode publicly across Europe, I think Spain quietly decided they wanted a different outcome for Sofia. Which explains why her image feels lighter lately. Less pressure, more individuality. Not because she matters less. Because the palace may actually want her to have more freedom. That's a fascinating trade-off when you think about it. Leonor receives the crown, Sofia may receive something arguably more valuable in private life, choice. And honestly, I wonder if people fully understand how rare that dynamic is becoming inside royal systems. Because while Leonor trains inside military structures, constitutional expectations, and future state responsibilities, Sofia still appears emotionally closer to ordinary youth culture. You can feel it in the body language alone. Leonor increasingly moves like someone aware she's constantly representing something larger than herself. Sofia still occasionally moves like someone discovering herself personally. That difference matters a lot. And before people misunderstand me, I'm not saying one sister has the better life. Honestly, I think both paths come with hidden costs. Leonor gains historical importance but loses spontaneity. Sofia gains flexibility but may spend years defining her identity beside one of the most watched future queens in Europe. Neither path is emotionally simple. And I think that complexity is exactly why audiences connect so strongly to them together. Because underneath the royal titles, people recognize something universal. Two sisters trying to navigate different expectations inside the same family. That's relatable on a deeply human level, even if the palace setting feels extraordinary. And this is where I think Queen Letitia's influence becomes incredibly important again. Because honestly, the emotional balance between these two sisters may become one of her greatest long-term achievements as a mother. Why? Because history shows royal sibling relationships can either stabilize monarchies, or quietly damage them for decades. And social media intensifies that risk massively now. Every appearance becomes comparison content. Who smiled more? Who looked confident? Who received attention? Who looked distant? That constant online ranking system is psychologically brutal. Especially for young royals. And honestly, I think Spain's palace is trying very hard to avoid turning Sofia into the forgotten sister. That's why her public role still feels visible enough to matter emotionally, but not so politically intense that it traps her completely. It's careful positioning, very careful positioning, and the more I watch it, the more strategic it feels. Because unlike older royal eras, today's monarchies understand something critical. The public doesn't just judge the heir anymore. They judge the emotional health of the family itself. That's why William and Catherine's image works so powerfully in Britain. People emotionally buy into stability now. Calmness sells. Unity sells. And Spain seems to be building a similar emotional architecture around Leonor and Sofia. Not identical personalities. Not identical futures. But emotional closeness despite different destinies. That's smart. Very smart. And honestly, I think Sofia's future role could become far more influential than people expect. Not constitutionally, culturally, because second-born royals often become bridges between the institution and ordinary people precisely because they carry slightly less symbolic weight. They can feel more approachable, more flexible, less ceremonial, and in the social media era, that relatability becomes incredibly powerful. In fact, here's something I've been thinking about lately. If Mr. Beast were advising a modern monarchy, and yes, I know that sounds crazy, but stay with me, he'd probably say audiences connect strongest when different personalities inside the brand feel authentic rather than perfectly identical. And honestly, that's exactly what Spain's royal family is quietly allowing now. Leonor represents structure. Sofia represents emotional accessibility. Together, the balance feels modern. And that balance may actually help the monarchy survive long-term. Because institutions today can't rely purely on tradition anymore. They need emotional engagement too. And Sofia may become incredibly important in that area later. But here's the hidden emotional challenge I keep thinking about. What happens when Leonor eventually becomes queen officially? Because right now, the sisters still exist relatively close together publicly. But eventually, their realities may separate much more dramatically. One becomes the state, the other remains adjacent to it. That shift changes relationships psychologically whether people admit it or not. And honestly, I hope the palace protects their bond carefully through that transition. Because isolation is one of the biggest dangers royal heirs face historically. That's why trusted siblings matter enormously inside monarchies. They often become the last remaining connection to normal emotional memory. The last person who remembers life before the institution fully took over. And I honestly think Sofia may become that emotional anchor for Leonor someday. Which makes their relationship far more important than internet gossip realizes. Because while headlines focus on royal fashion, dating rumors, and public appearances, the real long-term story might actually be about emotional survival. About whether these sisters can maintain genuine closeness while the monarchy slowly pulls their lives in different directions. And honestly, I think that's why people are becoming more emotionally invested in them lately. Not because audiences only care about royalty, but because people recognize something deeply human happening underneath all the symbolism. One sister is moving toward destiny. The other is moving toward identity. And both journeys come with loneliness people rarely talk about openly. That's why I personally believe Spain's monarchy is being far more intentional than it appears right now. They're not just preparing Leonor for the crown. They're preparing Sofia for life beside the crown. Huge difference. And maybe that's the smartest lesson they learned from watching other royal families struggle publicly over the past decade. Because in modern monarchy, protecting the family emotionally may be just as important as protecting the institution itself. And honestly, the more I watch Leonor and Sofia lately, the more convinced I become that Spain knows exactly how high the emotional stakes really are now.